And what he ultimately said is that he simply didn't want to live in a world where the U.S. government was permitted to engage in these extraordinary invasions, to build a system that had as its goal the destruction of all individual privacy, that he didn't want to live in a world like that, and that he could not in good conscience stand by and allow that to happen, knowing that he had the power to help stop it. And but the thing that was most striking to me about all of this is that I was with him for 11 straight days. I was with him when he was unknown because we hadn't yet divulged what his identity was, and I watched him watch the debates unfold on CNN and NBC and MSNBC and every other channel around the world that he had really hoped to provoke with the actions that he had taken. And I also watched him, once he was revealed, realize that he had become the most wanted man in the world, that official Washington was calling him a traitor, was calling for his head. And what was truly staggering to me, and continues to be staggering to me, is that there was never a moment, never an iota of remorse or regret or fear in any way. This was an individual completely at peace with the choice that he had made, because the choice that he made was so incredibly powerful. And I was incredibly inspired myself by being in proximity to somebody who had reached a state of such tranquility because they were so convicted that what they had done was right. And his courage and that passion infected me to the point where I had vowed that no matter what I did in my life with this story and beyond, that I would devote myself to doing justice to the incredible act of self-sacrifice that Edward Snowden had made. And that energy I watched then infect everybody who I work with at The Guardian, which is a very large media organization. And I'm the last person that would ever praise any media organization, even one that I work for, probably especially one that I work for. And yet I've watched over the last four weeks the editors of The Guardian, the top editors that run the newspaper and have for many years, engage in incredibly intrepid and fearless journalism as they have day after day dismissed the fear-mongering and threats of the United States government by saying we're going to continue to publish whatever it is that we think should be published in the public good. And if you talk to Edward Snowden and you ask him, as I did, what is it that inspired him, he talks about other individuals who engaged in similarly courageous behavior, like Bradley Manning. Or the Tunisian street vendor who set himself on fire and spawned one of the greatest democratic revolutions of the last 4 or 5 centuries in Europe. And what I actually started to realize about all of this is 2 things. Number one, courage is contagious. If you take a courageous step as an individual, you will literally change the world, because you will affect all sorts of people in your immediate vicinity, who will then affect others, who will then affect others. You should never doubt your ability to change the world. And the other thing that I realized is that it doesn't matter who you are as an individual, or how formidable or powerful the institutions that you want to challenge are. Mr. Snowden is a high school dropout. His parents worked for the federal government. He grew up in a lower middle class environment in a military community in Virginia. He ended up enlisting in the United States Army because he thought the Iraq War at first was noble. He then did the same with the CIA and the NSA because he thought those institutions were noble. He's a person who has zero privilege, zero power, zero position, and zero prestige, and yet he, by himself, has literally changed the world, and therefore so can many of you. And, one of the things that I realized early on was that not only he, but any of us who were involved in reporting these stories were going to be attacked and demonized in the way that Jeremy was just referencing. And, you see all sorts of attacks on him that are completely absurd and contrary to the facts. You hear claims from these sudden armchair psychologists that he's narcissistic. I don't even think they know what that means. But it's just become the script that they all read from. That's somebody who could have sold these documents to intelligence services for millions of dollars and spent the rest of his life secretly enriched beyond his wildest dreams and did none of that. He instead stepped forward and made himself a target for the good of all of us. Or they say that they try and impugn his motives, and they say, well, he's just a fame monger or a fame whore is the phrase of choice at the moment. I have spent the last 3 weeks being harassed by telephone by the most ridiculous media stars in the United States who are completely desperate to interview Edward Snowden and put him on their show every single day. He could have been one of the most famous people in the world by now. He is far more a recluse than a fame whore. He has refused every single one of those interviews because his real motive in doing what he did is exactly what he said, which is not to make himself famous, but to make the people of the United States and the world aware of what is being done to them by the United States government in secret. But the reason that it's always so common for people like Edward Snowden to be demonized, the reason it's so important to attribute psychological illness to him, the way they did with Bradley Manning, the way they do with all whistleblowers, the way they tried to do with Daniel Ellsberg, is precisely because they know what I just said, which is that courage is contagious, and that he will set an example for other people to similarly come forward and blow the whistle on the corrupt and illegal and deceitful things that they're doing in the dark. They need to make a negative example out of him so that that doesn't happen. And that's the reason why people like Edward Snowden are so demonized and attacked, and it's why it's up to all of us to defend him and hold him up as the noble example that he is so that he does continue to So that was the eye-opening effect that all of this has had on me personally, and I'm sure I haven't even thought through all the implications, and I'll continue to do so as the months go by. But I do know for certain that this experience will form me and shape me and millions of other people around the world in all sorts of ways. So I just want to spend a little bit of time talking as well about the substance of the revelations and about what it is that we know about the U.S. surveillance state. And, I'm somebody who has written about the surveillance state for years now. It was actually the topic of the speech that I gave to this conference last year. And I kept trying to work through today how it is that I feel having watched all of these documents be revealed and have all these secrets spilled that prove that the surveillance state really is as menacing and ubiquitous as many of us have long been saying. And I keep coming back to this scene, this sort of iconic scene in the Woody Allen film Annie Hall, where Woody Allen is waiting in a movie theater line, and he sort of has this fantasy that we all wish would happen but never does. There's this pompous, pontificating pseudo-intellect standing behind him in line who's bombastically talking about the media theories of Marshall McLuhan. And Woody Allen turns around and says, "You don't know what you're talking about. You've gotten Marshall McLuhan all wrong." And this pseudo-intellect says, "No, you don't know what you're talking about." And Woody Allen says, "Well, I just happen to have Marshall McLuhan right here." And he goes behind this little tree nearby and pulls him out. And Marshall McLuhan says, "I'm Marshall McLuhan." And he turns around to the guy behind Woody Allen and says, "You don't know what you're talking about. Woody Allen is absolutely right about my theories, and he's vindicated in the best possible way." The reason why I feel a little bit like that is because I've been engaged in so many debates over the last several years. I've written endlessly about the fact that the goal of the U.S. surveillance state, the National Security Agency, and the entire national security apparatus on which it's based is to make sure that there is no such thing as individual human privacy, not just in the United States, but in the world. And I have repeatedly been told that this is absurd hyperbole, that this is conspiratorial thinking, that the NSA is constrained by all these wonderful legal frameworks. And I feel a little bit like being able to say, well, you know what? I just happen to have a huge stack of top secret NSA documents right here. And you know, these issues involving surveillance and the surveillance system that they're building are complex. They're legally complex. They're technologically complex. It is difficult to simplify them in a way that is digestible for the news cycle. So I just want to spend a little bit of time talking about not just the stories, but just some of the facts that have been revealed already by us. And it's a small fraction of what is coming. But I think the picture already is quite clear. Just yesterday or 2 days ago, we published a document by one small part of the National Security Agency called the Secret Source Operations, one of the most secretive units of the NSA. And there was an internal document in this SSO unit dated December 12th, 2012, so the end of last year. And what this document did was it was celebrating a milestone, the way other people celebrate their birthdays. What it said was, congratulations to us, this unit of the SSO. We have just collected our 1 trillionth piece of email internet metadata. That's 1 trillion with a T. And what that means is that every single day they are collecting hundreds of millions of our email records and the email records of people around the world to find out who is emailing us, to whom we are sending emails, what our IP address is when we open the emails and read them, which means what our physical location is, and then being able to piece together what our network is, who our associations are, what our life patterns are, what it is that we do on the internet, what our interests are, what animates us, a whole variety of information that they are sucking up and vacuuming, not about individuals who they think are guilty of terrorism, but about human beings indiscriminately. Another document that I probably shouldn't, but since it's not published, but I'm going to anyway, I'll share with you. And this one's coming soon, but you're getting a little preview. It talks about how a brand new technology enables the National Security Agency to redirect into its own repositories 1 billion cell phone calls every single day. 1 billion cell phone calls every single day. What we are really talking about here is a globalized system that prevents any form of electronic communication from taking place without its being stored and monitored by the National Security Agency. It doesn't mean they're listening to every call. It means they're storing every call and have the capability to listen to them at any time. And it does mean that they're collecting millions upon millions upon millions of our phone and email records. It is a globalized system designed to destroy all privacy. And what's incredibly menacing about it is that it is all taking place in the dark with no accountability and virtually no safeguards. And the purpose of our story and the purpose of Edward Snowden's whistleblowing is not singularly or unilaterally to destroy those systems. The purpose is to say, if you, the United States government, and the governments around the world want to create a globalized surveillance system in which we no longer have any privacy in our individual lives or on the internet, you at least ought to have us know about it, have you do it in the sunlight so that we can decide democratically whether that's the kind of system and the kind of world in which we want to live. So the last point I want to make is that I think that one of the things that I know I set out to do, and I think that Mr. Snowden set out to do, and that I know the people at The Guardian set out to do, was not simply to publish some stories about the NSA. It was to really shake up the foundations of the corrupted and rotted roots of America's political and media culture. And the reason I say that is that there's an economist, Dean Baker, who yesterday on Twitter wrote that he thinks that the stories that we're doing are shining as much light on the corruption of American journalism as they are on the ongoing operations of the National Security Agency. And I think that is true for several different reasons. Number one is that if you look at the quote-unquote debate over the very charming, endearing debate about whether or not I should be arrested, prosecuted, and then imprisoned under espionage statutes for doing journalism, what you find is that that debate is being led by other people who are TV actors who play the role of journalists on TV. They're the ones who are actually leading the debate. And the reason that they're doing that is because they purport to be adversaries of political power or watchdogs over political power, but what they really are servants to political power. They're appendages of political power. And so what you find is that they always lead the way in attacking whoever challenges the political system in Washington, because that is the system of which they're a part. That's the system that props them up, gives them oxygen, and provides them with all of their privilege, wealth, and access. And I think their true role, which is not to serve as adversaries of people in government power or to expose what they're doing, but to protect and shield them and amplify their message, has become more vividly exposed in the last 4 weeks than it has in quite a long time. And the thing that really amazes me is that if you look at how whistleblowers are treated, whether it be Bradley Manning or WikiLeaks or Thomas Drake at the NSA or Edward Snowden, I can understand why Americans in general, just ordinary Americans, have ambivalence about those whistleblowers. Some people think security is more important, or that secrecy is something that should be decided by democratically elected officials and not by individual whistleblowers. That I all get. But what I don't understand and can never believe is that anybody who at any point thought of themselves as somebody who had a journalistic ethos would look at people who are shining light on the world's most powerful factions and do anything but applaud them and express gratitude for them, since that's supposed to be the function that they, the journalists themselves, are serving. And yet what you find is the exact opposite. What you really find is that if you look at who hates Bradley Manning, or who has expressed the most contempt about WikiLeaks, or who has led the chorus in demonizing Edward Snowden, it is those very people in the media who pretend to want transparency, because transparency against political power is exactly what they don't want, because those are their masters, and the stronger they stay, and the stronger that system stays, the more rewarded they will be. And what is really amazing most of all about it is that while they purport to hate leaks, they themselves are the most prolific users of leaks. I was on Meet the Press last week, the first time I ever ventured into the belly of the imperial beast. And some of you probably know, but it got a lot of attention because David Gregory all but called for my prosecution during the interview. And the reason why, there were a lot of reasons why that was pretty amazing, but one of the most extraordinary things about it was that 90 seconds or so before he actually called for my prosecution, because I committed the crime of doing journalism, of showing the public what the government is doing in the dark, He and I had an argument about a FISA court opinion that had been issued in 2011 that found many of the things that the National Security Agency was doing to be unconstitutional and illegal. And I had described this opinion based on the documents that I have in my possession that talks about them. And he objected and he said, oh no, the way you've described this opinion is not accurate. I've had government officials tell me that what's actually in this opinion was not a finding that the government did anything wrong or illegal or unconstitutional. Perish the thought. This was nothing more than the government going to the court and saying, can we please have permission to do this spying that we would like to do in the future but haven't yet done? And the court said, no, you're allowed to do this and this and this, but not this and this and this. And then the government went and obeyed the court. Now, David Gregory's claims about what that court opinion were completely false, as I well know because I've actually seen documents talking about them as opposed to having government officials whisper in my ear what it says. But what was really amazing about it was that 90 seconds later, he was calling for my prosecution for having disclosed classified information, and yet he, 90 seconds earlier, had just gotten done saying that somebody in the government had come to him and described this top-secret court document, which he then disclosed to the public and to the world by telling me what he thought it said. And the same exact thing happened on CNN when Barbara Starr, who is the Pentagon spokeswoman who works for CNN as the Pentagon reporter, she went on the air and she said, government officials have informed me that the revelations from Edward Snowden published in The Guardian have helped the terrorists by enabling them to evade our systems and change the way that they communicate. It is. It's hilarious. Because apparently there are terrorists in the world who haven't heard and don't know that the U.S. government is trying to eavesdrop on their telephone calls and read their emails. These same terrorists are going to be sophisticated enough to detonate very powerful bombs on U.S. soil. But leave that aside. What Barbara Starr did was she had people in government come and leak classified information to her, which she then went on the air and spilled to the world, things that the intelligence agencies supposedly learned that terrorists were doing, and yet nobody called for Barbara Starr's prosecution or dug into her past, and nobody did that to David Gregory, including David Gregory, because what they do is, in their minds, the only kinds of leaks that are bad are leaks that the government doesn't want disclosed to the public. The only crime that you commit is when you do reporting that the government doesn't want you to do, when you expose things to your readers and to your viewers that embarrass political officials. The only thing that is journalism to them is when they carry forth the message that has been implanted in their brains by the political officials whom they serve. And I think this behavior highlights the true purpose of establishment journalism more powerfully than anything I or anybody else have ever written. The very last point I want to make, the thing that I really want to leave you with, the thing that I am trying to get myself to be left with as the thing that is defining how I look at everything from this point forward, is that one of the things that has been most disturbing over the last 3 to 4 years has been this climate of fear that has emerged in exactly the circles that are supposed to challenge government. It has emerged among investigative journalists, including the ones at the most protected media outlets like the New York Times and others. The real investigative journalists who are at these institutions, who do real reporting, are petrified of the U.S. government now. Their sources are beyond petrified. The investigative journalist Jane Mayer, who did so much excellent work uncovering the torture regime during the Bush years, has said that because of the Obama war on whistleblowers and journalism that Jeremy described, investigative journalism in the United States has come to a, quote, standstill. If you talk to anybody in journalism or in the government, they are petrified of even moving. We have had almost it has been almost impossible to get anyone inside the government to call us back with regard to any story because people are so scared that if anything on their phone record shows that they've called me or called The Guardian, they will be held in extreme suspicion as leakers. And it's not just journalists, but also dissident groups that have been infiltrated and Muslim communities that have been monitored in all sorts of ways. There is a climate of fear in exactly those factions that are most intended to put a check on on those in power. And that has been by design. And one of the things that I set out to do as one of my principal priorities and how I've done this story and how I've gone about that is to show that you actually don't need to be afraid, that you can stand up to the United States government and be defiant when they deserve it and exercise your constitutional right without that. And so that is the message that I hope more than anything is conveyed on a visceral level. The revelations about the NSA are important. The things that we learn about journalism is important. But ultimately, the thing that matters most is that the rights that we know we have as human beings are rights that we ought to exercise and that nobody can take away from us. And the only way those rights can ever be taken away is if we give in to the fear that is being deliberately imposed. And so that, I hope, is the message of Edward Snowden and of the reporting that we're doing, which is you not only shouldn't be afraid, but do not be afraid. Thank you very much for